Okay, today we're going to talk about the set off and the stretch provision. Now, previously, when I took the exam in 2020, you saw set off and you saw stretch. Over the years, I have heard from students that have taken the test that it was one or the other. It wasn't both, but I do feel like both are important to know, and you just never know which one may come on the exam, so you should definitely have a grasp on both. So the stretch and the set off provisions in a nutshell allows a team to reduce the amount of salary that will hit their salary cap for a player that is waived. So essentially, if you're not familiar with what it means for a player to be waived, it's when they get cut. So basically, a team cuts a player, but they are still responsible for the guaranteed amount of that player's contract. So in their mind, they're like, what can I do to remove some of this salary to enable me to sign another player? That's what this whole thing about is moving the salary cap around to make sure that you have the best team possible and that the players that you have are paid and they are happy. So what the set off and the stretch provision allows teams to do is after they waive a player, they have that guaranteed amount. The set off will allow them to pay a lower amount, while the stretch will take the amount that they owe them and it will stretch it over a longer period of time, essentially lowering the payments that are owed as well. So there are some key differences between the set off and the stretch provisions. The difference between the set off and stretch is the set off lowers the team salary, whereas the stretch provision adds more time for the team to pay the player. Another main thing to note about the set off and the stretch is the set off requires the player to sign with another team to be utilized. And that doesn't have to be an NBA team. It can be any professional team. So they can sign it with an overseas team. They can sign with Ice Cube's 3-on-3 league. It just has to be another professional basketball team. So those are the differences right off the top with the set off and stretch. And every year I get questions about, well, how do you know when they're asking you a set off question and when they're asking you a stretch question? Well, number one, they may mention the player signing with another team, and that should prompt you to think set off because you need another team. That player has to sign with another team in order for the initial team to be able to set off that contract. And stretch is more about the time and the timing of that. So we'll see where that time comes into play. So the set off provision, if another team signs a player who has cleared waivers, the player's original team is allowed to reduce the amount of money it still owes the player and lower its team salary. This applies when a player signs with any professional team, i.e. overseas teams. The first team to terminate a player's contract will have the right to set off and will be passed down to each team in order. So if that player was passed around like a hot potato, signed with one team, put on waivers, clear waivers. Sign with another team, put on waivers, clear waivers. Sign with a third team, put on waivers, clear waivers. The first team has to set off that full amount before the second team that waived that player is able to set off. If a player has been waived and his salary has been stretched, his salary can be set off only during the original term of the contract. And that may not make sense right now, but when we look at the stretch, you'll see that it may be a 3-year contract or 3 years remaining on the contract, but the team may have 7 years of paying that player back. And so what this bullet is saying is that the set off can only be done in the first 3 years, not the additional 4 years that were given based off the stretch provision. All right, so the set off calculation is the new contract minus the minimum salary, which is normally at 1 year of service. And during the exam, they will give you these figures. They will give you the Exhibit C, which has the minimum salary chart, or they will mention what the minimum salary is. So it's not a number that you have to make up or a number that you have to memorize because these numbers change yearly. So the NBPA will provide those numbers for you. So it's the new contract minus the minimum salary divided by 2, and that gives you the set off amount. So here's a question. TyTy Washington, the 29th pick in the 2022 draft, has a 4-year, $11.3 million contract. He was traded from the Rockets to the Thunder after 2 years. The Thunder will pay him $6.7 million if the minimum player salary is $1,017,781. What is the Rockets set off amount? And so with the questions, even on the exam, you want to make sure that you're understanding exactly what the question is asking you to calculate. So in this question, they ask you, what is the set off amount? So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to figure out what the set off amount is. So how I like to approach all these questions is I like to identify all of the different numbers that we're going to need before I approach the question. So we need the new contract, we need the old contract, we need whatever the minimum player salary is. Once I identify those numbers, I just plug and play from there. So we take the new salary at 6.7 million and we subtract the minimum salary, and then we get $5,682,219. And then we divide that by 2, and that gives us $2,841,109.50. That is the set off amount. If this question is simply asking what is the set off amount, that is the answer. Now, if the question asks us something different, that is when we would have to move to the next steps in the calculation. But from what I recall, what the feedback I've been receiving over the years, this is just what they want, is the set off amount. Now, if they were to ask you, what is the Rockets' new salary cap hit for TyTy Washington? Then we have to go to another step and we have to calculate what the new salary cap hit is. In that case, we would take the old contract minus the set off amount, and that gives us his new salary cap hit for that team. Because remember, the whole purpose of the set off is to be able to pay TyTy Washington a lower amount, to lower the amount that appears on our salary cap for that player that is no longer with our team. So that would be $8,458,890.50. If the question asks what is the new salary TyTy Washington would receive as a salary for season 5, we would go to step 5. Once again, I can't predict what comes on the exam. I don't know if they'll go as far as to asking you this, but I just say it's better to be prepared than unprepared. So we would take the new salary plus the old salary, and we would subtract the set off amount, and that would give us what TyTy Washington is going to be paid for the remainder of the year. Okay, now to the stretch provision. Now, the set off provision allows you to pay less. The stretch provision, you still end up paying less, but you have more years. And the calculation for that is 2 times the length of the contract, which is a nuanced situation, plus 1. So if the contract is waived, remember, waived, when the player is waived, they're placed in the holding tank for 48 hours, and teams are able to acquire that player from waivers. If no team acquires that player from waivers, the player is said to have cleared waivers and they are now an unrestricted free agent and can sign with whoever they want, but the team is still responsible for paying them the guaranteed amount or the protected amount of their contract. So in that case, if they're waived during the off season, which is considered as July 1st to August 31st, then the entire contract, the entire guarantee contract is stretched. If the contract is stretched during the season, then the current contract is paid normally and that is not added into the calculation. And I know that may sound confusing, but look at it this way. If the player is waived during the season, then the $5 million that they were already slotted to make that year will just continue to be paid out as normal. Now, year 2 and 3 and 4 of that contract, that's the portion that we're going to stretch. But if the player was waived during the off season, meaning that he hasn't received any money as yet for the upcoming season, then we're going to stretch the entire contract. All right. So if a player is waived with more than $500,000 remaining guarantee remaining on the contract, then it can be stretched. The stretch provision allows teams to make equal payments over a longer period of time. And the stretch provision allows teams to lower the cap hit from released players. Essentially, the set off and stretch, that's a purpose. They want to lower their cap hit so they can go out and sign other players. In our last example, we saw about $2.8 million freed up. That can sign a minimum player, that can sign a minimum player with a lot of experience to bring onto that team. All right. So if the player is not claimed off waivers, aka released, aka clear waivers, then the team can elect to stretch the guaranteed amount. We just talked about that. All right. If a team elects to stretch a player's protected compensation, so the guaranteed amount, then the team cannot re-sign or reacquire that player before the later of 1 year from the date the contract was terminated or July 1st of the last season covered by the player's contract. So if they stretch a player's contract, they can't re-sign that player or reacquire that player until the later of either of these two occurrences. So how do we do the stretch calculation? So step one is to figure out what is the time frame in which this player was waived. Is it during the season or is it during the off season? Then you need to figure out the years to be stretched, and that will be given to us in the question. So if the player is waived on August 1st with 2 seasons remaining on his contract at 20.2 and 20.3 million respectively, how is the contract stretched? So August 1st is between July 1st and August 31st. That means that we're going to stretch the entire contract because he hasn't played in that season as yet. He got waived during the off season. So all of the contract can be stretched. If this question said September 1st, then we would only be stretching the 20.3. So we'll go through both ways of how this contract would be, how this computation or calculation would be impacted. So we do the 2 times the years remaining on the contract. And since he was stretched during the off season, and that came directly from the question, we do 2 times 2, which is 4, plus 1 gives us 5. So this is 5 years that we're going to stretch the contract. So although the player only had 2 years on the contract, the team now has 5 years in which to pay him back this same amount of money. Now we have to calculate what the remaining salary is. And remember, because he was waived August 1st, this year, this 20.2, which would have been this year, we have to count this. So we take the 20.2 and the 20.3, that gives us 40.5. And then step 4, we have to divide the stretch years by the salary. So 40.5 divided by 5, it gives us 8.1. So the contract is paid over 5 years at 8.1 million evenly each year. So that is a huge difference from this 20.2 million that we owe. We now only owe 8.1 million over the next 5 years. Now, if this question said that the player was stretched on September 1st, then this would change. We would do 2 times 1 because this 20.2 would be paid out as normal. We're already in season. He's already been getting paid. We're going to just pay that out as normal. So we would only have 2 times 1 plus 1, which would be 3. And then calculating his remaining salary, it would only be the 20.3 because we would only have that 1 year. So then we would take the 20.3 and divide that by 3, and that would give us 6.76. So that's how the question changes in the event that the player is waived during the off season or they're waived during the season. And that is it for the set off and the stretch provision.